Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Veil and the Thread podcast. We are mother and daughter team. I'm Sarah, I'm the daughter.
And I am Elizabeth, the mother.
So, this is episode 2. For those of you that had the opportunity to listen last time, it was basically a bit of an introduction to the two of us and how we came about um, spiritualism in our lives. So, this episode, I guess we're going to start to get into the meatier subjects, I suppose. And I think my mother has got an interesting topic that we'll be talking about today. Do you want to introduce what we're going to be discussing today, Mum?
Yeah, I think it'd be a really nice start to talk about um, what it is to be an empath and what it feels like to be an empath, and yeah, and how you survive if you are an empath.
Okay, so empath is the big topic today. So empath is one of those things. I think we hear it a lot nowadays, a lot more than we used to. Everybody seems to, whenever you turn on a program or you listen to somebody talk, oh, I'm an empath, I'm an empath, and I think it is becoming, I think as we develop and society as a whole develops and grows spiritually, I think there are more and more empaths. But for those of us that don't really know exactly what it means, or maybe have got the wrong idea, how would you how would you summarize what an empath is from your spiritual perspective?
Yeah. I think, in my opinion, an empath is somebody who is very easily tuned into other people's emotions and their feelings. Not just in terms of other people, but can also, transcend to animals and to buildings, particularly ancient buildings. So,
Mm.
and I think the traits of an empath, if you're not sure if you are one, would be somebody who is affected very much by other people's emotions. So they may walk into a room and suddenly feel a strong emotion. May not be aware of where it's coming from or who it's coming from, but it's a very strong emotion. And that emotion is often of sadness, or it could be fear, it could be fear. It could also be something nice, like,
Mm.
someone's feeling of elation and happiness. But also it can have a very dark side to it, in that those feelings that an empath tunes into can be very overwhelming, to the point
Yeah.
where you can start to avoid situations where,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
yeah, so I was going to just interrupt there because I think for myself, who is one of those people I mentioned earlier that would identify as being an empath,
Oh,
um,
yes.
I think the first thing that I'll say, when you said that you can pick up emotions and feelings that are positive and happy, and whilst that's true, I think it's the unfortunate case that the majority of the time it's the lower energies, isn't it, that we're picking up on in
Oh,
in society.
oh, yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I think for me it's I think it's something that I'm still working on, to be honest. It's not necessarily something that I've figured out fully, but you go through life thinking, well, for me anyway, I was a young kid and I was like, God, why am I so miserable and grumpy all the time, Why do I always feel down and feel like I have this heaviness? And that that is still true of me really in a lot of ways, but I think now I'm more aware that actually that's a lot of that emotion is not mine, it's other people's. And I think even at my grand old age, I'm still getting used to having to remind myself, this is not your depression, or this is not your heaviness, this is not your grief or your sadness. It can be quite a difficult thing to realize, eh?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And if you're not lucky enough to have that realization at some point, you do think this is you, this is your personality. You're just miserable and depressed and feeling lonely and isolated and all those negative thoughts. Not being aware that this is not actually who you are. This is a whole heap of other emotions collected from a whole range of other people. And you make that valid point about, you know, more often the emotions you pick up from other people are the sad, negative ones. Because let's face it, there's so much, misery out there,
Mm,
that it's it's almost dangerous for an empath to go out on some days,
mm,
you know.
yeah.
So yeah, but
Yeah, it's like you can just be so bombarded, and I think one of the big things as well is understanding how quickly those energies can be picked up. I mean, I know
mm, mm,
when you read stuff about empaths and how energies can be absorbed, people will say, oh, you walk into a shop, or, you walk into somewhere and you have a quick transaction. That, one of the big examples always being you go into the supermarket and the cashier's having a bad day, and then you walk out of the supermarket and half an hour later you're thinking, oh, where's this, dark energy coming from? And do you think do you think it can be that quick? Do you think it can be that easy
mm-hmm.
to pick up those emotions where you're literally having a 1 minute transaction with somebody, yet you absorb so much of that energy?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And I think for someone like yourself who's, you've been an empath all your life, it's like what comes first, the chicken or the egg kind of situation. But I think looking back on your life, I think I identified a sensitivity when you were around 3, but didn't have the word empath at that time. But I think though, picking up those emotions can happen very quickly, and not only by walking into a room or meeting a person for the first time. It can happen remotely. As you know, you've often picked up people's emotions from across the Atlantic.
Mm.
So as an empath, you don't even have to be close to that person physically
Yeah,
to.
yeah, that's true. I guess so then would you put that in the same category as Um, well, I use the example of twins, but it doesn't even have to be twins, like you said, friends, people that you're close to, family members,
Mm,
where, you think, oh, I wonder if so and so's okay.
yeah.
Thought pops into your head. Now, how is that? Are we still talking about empathic energy then, or are we talking about something different, psychic or?
Yeah, I think it starts off as empathic, um, picking up of energy. I think where it becomes more than that is when you're able to put something to it, something to the emotion, so that you can think, I feel something's wrong, and you actually have an inkling as to what that might be. So you're not just picking up the raw emotion, you're actually now taking it to a different level where you're thinking, okay, I've got this emotion, it's about this person. What is it to do with? And I think that's when you're kind of taking it to a different level.
Okay, then, I guess that naturally leads on to the next question for me, because obviously working within the circles we do, there's psychic abilities, there's mediumship abilities, which are different, and so people might be a little bit confused as to where does empath end, or what, how can you put empath in a box, and how can you put psychic in a box, and how can you put mediumship in a box, if you know what I mean. I mean, there's going to be crossover with all of those things at some point, but we might have listeners thinking, well, am I just an empath because I can pick up somebody's emotions that is sat next to me, or do I have psychic abilities because actually I know that someone in their family just had a baby recently, or they drive a green car or something like that. You know what do you know what
Yeah, I
I
do.
mean?
There's a lot to unpack there, and I think to to start with, I think probably what needs to happen is for us to go back to what it means to be an empath, because
Mm,
not everybody who's sensitive would class themselves as an empath. You know, they would say, oh, yeah, I'm sensitive to that person's feelings and emotions, but it's, I think an empath generally starts off with a, if you like, an extreme of those emotions that they
yeah,
then have to learn to manage. Whereas a lot of people can be extremely sensitive and caring. For example, I think an example of an empath for me would be somebody a bit like yourself, where you would toddle off to school on a morning and you'd be okay. You never wanted to go there. We now know
mm,
why, because that was just like, you know, a
mm,
crazy environment for an empath. But
yeah,
you would go into that environment and survive the day and come home in the evening, and you just couldn't talk about anything. It was like, if I said to you, oh, what kind of day have you had? I don't know. What did you do today? I don't remember. And it's
yeah,
only later when I look back, I think what you were saying is, I've had a shit day. Excuse my
yeah,
language. Please don't talk to me about it. Just give me a drink and a snack. Leave me alone and I'll be fine. And we used to go home and you'd sit and play the piano for a while. And I learned to realise she needs downtime, you know,
yeah,
because you were picking up everybody's emotions at school. And there were other kids that would go to school and pick up other people's emotions and feelings, but it didn't have the same impact it would have on you as an empath. And I think as well, empaths come in all shapes and sizes. Some
mm,
empaths learn very early in their lives how to control it by different means, whether it's avoidance, becoming quite an introvert, um, or they just find their own way of managing it. But
yeah.
in order to do that really well, you need to be aware of this is what you are.
Yeah, so
So
then I guess when you talk about how, because I think when you're aware of why you feel this way and what's going on, you think it is quite a brutal world for people that pick up other people's emotions, and yeah, it's like, it makes me think of those. I don't know if they still have them, but the ball pits that you used to play in as a kid, and you'd go down the slide and land in all of these, plastic balls, and I guess that's the analogy for how you feel. You're thrown into this ball pit of emotions, you know. I guess in my mind it's like Velcro balls and jumping in, wearing a Velcro suit. You get all of these balls stuck all over you, and it's really hard to get rid of them. So I guess my question is, why? What is the use in that? Why do we have this I I say ability, this empathic ability, but some people might actually describe it as a curse. So what is, what's the purpose of it?
Yeah. Well, in terms of purpose, I suppose in many ways it's a huge advantage, I think, if you can have that level of empathy for other people, to the point where you can actually feel their pain. And that's, in a sense, when it's unbridled, it's not disciplined, that's when it is the curse. But then when
Mm.
you realise what you are and you start to put steps in place to manage it and use it to the benefit, not just of yourself, but other people, that's when I think it becomes a real gift, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a harsh way of, I suppose, of learning empathy and sensitivity, but I don't know. I think for me, as you know, I am also an empath. Would I want to not be an empath? I don't think so. I think now that I understand it better, um, I see it as a benefit.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I guess I would agree, but it it does come with its downside, doesn't it? I mean, one of the things is, that I'm I am constantly told by people is that I'm somebody who I can be very hard to read, and people often feel as though I have a lot of walls up.
Mm,
And
mm,
really, everything about that is completely contrary to who I am as a person. I'm a Cancerian, I'm an
mm-hmm.
empath. I'm a very intuitive person. I consider myself to be a very loving and caring person. But to people that don't know me, and quite often to people that do know me, they talk about how I have these walls up and I have this, I guess it is typically Cancerian, this hard shell. And I know that that's self protection for me, because without sounding like I'm playing the world's smallest violin, life can be it can be very tiring and it can be very draining, as I'm sure other sensitives and empaths can appreciate. So it's almost like you're this person who's very caring, but you can often appear the complete opposite
Yeah,
because of those
that's yeah.
protections that you've put in place.
Yeah, that's true. But I think you would agree that when people do get to know you, I hear them say, "Oh, you don't seem to have as many barriers.
Mm.
Um, you seem to have a lot of barriers when I first met you, but now you seem to have warmed to us or to me." And I think that's because by having those barriers, it gives you time to suss out, can I remove some of these barriers, or is it going to be overwhelming,
Yeah.
if I take them down? So to me, that's you learning how to control
Mm.
your empathic nature. And so, if the price to pay is, sometimes people think that you're a closed book, um, then it's a price worth paying, because if those same people stick around, get to know you long enough, and you feel you can take down those walls, then they've got a very beautiful friendship,
Mm. Yeah.
there. So
Mm.
I think those walls, they're necessary, and even more so in the current climate where there's so much negativity around. I think everybody finds their own ways of surviving, and that's yours. I mean, the good thing is that, to me, that's a positive, because you go out. We're all aware of empaths who just can't walk out the door anymore because they find it too
Mm.
painful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
better to have
Yeah.
those walls of protection but still go
Yeah,
out.
I can understand that for, I'm very much for the tarot card readers out there. I really do embody the hermit energy, that's that so I can understand people that take that to the extreme and feel as though they just can't, be around anyone or go out at all.
Yeah,
Can
yeah.
understand that.
And for
And so
me,
then, sorry,
sorry,
go.
just a sec. And for me, I can go out and I have less walls, I think, than you, but I'm so much older as well. So,
Mm.
um, empaths change over time as well as everything else. But I can't watch anything on TV, even a comedy. If there's any level of anxiety in that film, I'm out. I'm checking out.
Yeah.
It's like, call me back in 10 minutes when this terrible, tense moment in the film is over, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
which I think is true of a lot of empaths. You hear people talk about how, and I'm the same, they just can't watch horror films or, violence. And I guess maybe it's even worse nowadays than before because I guess older films there's a lot more psychological. I mean, this is kind of going down a little
mhm.
bit of a tangent for a second, but a lot of older films, the violence or the horror element of it was more psychological. So is it the Psycho film famously where they ask people about the shower scene and they ask to
Mm,
describe the
mm.
violence and people will give a description of what that shower scene was and what happened, but then actually you don't ever actually see any violence. You see the surroundings and you hear the sound effects. And so I think that goes to show we fill in the blanks at the level that we are emotionally and mentally capable of doing so. So,
Yeah,
for me, my blanks are going to be filled in with a lot, perhaps a lot less violence than somebody else. And so we're dealing with a level of something that we we have created ourselves, so it's a little bit safer. Whereas nowadays, I think films are so much more visually graphic and in your face. It's like, oh, wow, I'm being shown something that I would never have wanted to imagine in my own mind, but now that's been shown to me, and
yeah.
that central nervous system overload.
Oh, oh my God, yeah. It is sensory overload. And it's not just TV, it's not just films. I can remember a radio show and it was on around 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was on my way to work. And this show would be about people who'd written in to talk about a tragedy in their life, like they might have met the love of their life, and just before they got married, they found out that one of them had cancer and it was terminal, or, for me, even worse, it'd be a child and that child
Mm.
was terminally ill. And seriously, I would have to pull in side of the road and just sob my heart out and arrive at work with a red nose and bloodshot eyes because I had just sobbed for
You know,
10,
I
15
I
minutes.
I even remember that radio show. I remember the music.
Yes,
Yeah,
I can
yeah,
still
I'll
hear
remember that
it.
theme tune forever.
Yeah, and I would. People would say, "What's wrong? Oh, what? Why you? What's has something happened?" And I'd say, "Oh, there was this really sad story, and this woman's husband died. They'd only been together several months, and I would be sobbing for somebody else, that I didn't know."
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
and you can't live life like that.
Oh no, I had to start as soon as it came on. I'd turn it off,
Yeah.
and that was my coping
Mm,
strategy. Really, just don't subject yourself to it, you know.
mm.
So, but
So I
yeah,
guess then on a larger scale and in line with obviously what our podcast is about, how does how does the empath thing fit into the world of spiritualism for you?
Yeah. Well, in a big way, really. I think a lot of mediums are empaths, but not all mediums
Mm,
are empaths. I want to make that clear, really. It seems like it's a bit like the gateway drug, you know.
mm,
Empaths often find themselves going down the mediumship route.
yeah.
Um, but as I said, not all empaths become mediums, and not all mediums are empaths. But it does seem to be a natural progression for many, many empaths. It certainly was for me. I was drawn to the spiritual movement, I think, because of the empathy, and just things come in so overwhelming. Not just because I'd lost my father suddenly, and not just because my friend had lost her baby, all within weeks of one another, um, but it just seemed to culminate really with so much that I'd felt growing up. I mean, this is
Mm,
how much my empathy affected me. When I was a little girl, I was about 5 or 6, and my dad used to play snakes and ladders with me and Ludo, drafts and what have you. And I used to try and lose the game every time, because
mm,
I thought in my little mind that it would upset him for my dad if he lost the game. So I would try
yeah.
to lose at snakes and ladders so that his
Yeah.
feelings wouldn't be hurt. So, I was that kind of weird kid. So going to the
I
spiritualist,
think just to interject, I think a lot of people probably would resonate with that though. You
do you
know,
think?
perhaps not at such a young age, but
Mm,
I know of a lot of people. But then maybe this is something different because I know of a lot of people who, they'll go maybe they'll go golfing with a parent, or they'll play darts, or they'll play something, and it they kind of have that whole thing of, oh well, I don't want to beat my parent because then there's kind of that change in dynamics then.
yeah,
But I guess
yeah,
that maybe that's something different where people feel like, oh, I don't want to feel like my parents becoming the child and I'm becoming the parent. I don't know,
yeah.
would
Well,
that still fit
maybe
in that realm?
it's probably coming from an empathic way of thinking,
Mm,
I would think. But yeah, so going back to that, I started going to the spiritualist church, and I joined a development circle, and and I think that's when I began to hear the word empathy. Not so much empath, but empathy. It's okay to show empathy. That's
mm,
a positive quality. But let me tell you something that I think is really, really important. Um, as I say, I was in an open circle, beginning to develop mediumistic qualities. And I
mm-hmm,
remember one time being very, very upset. There'd been the murder of a young child. And it just, I couldn't let it go, and it just stayed with me constantly. And I mentioned it to my spiritual teacher one evening, and she said, and this is where I was pulled up as an empath in a very, very big way. And she said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Oh, I just can't get this murder of this little girl out of my mind. It's just so horrible. And, I keep crying." And she said, "Oh, so is it one of your children then that was murdered?" I said, "No." She said, "So it's not your grief then?" And I said, "No." She said, "So who gave you permission to take it?" And I
mm,
just stopped in my tracks, and I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "This family is going through the most horrendous grief, the loss of a child that's been murdered. What gives you
yeah.
the right to take their grief
Mm,
and and to share in that grief?" And before I even got a chance to say anything, she said, "Your energy should be spent in sending out healing and sending out love, not just to the family, but the child who now is in spirit."
Yeah.
And she said, this is your role and this is what you should be doing as a developing medium. And when you become a medium,
Mm.
you do not take someone else's grief on and feel it, because that's indulgent. Wow, what a real slap in the face that was for me. But it did kind of make me start to think, yeah, I need to get this empathic emotion under control.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I suppose for me that's well, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think the first thing that listeners might be thinking is, wow, what a bitch this woman was to
Yeah,
say
she,
this to you, because I can understand people thinking, well, it's that it's something tragic has happened. People are going to feel devastated, even if it's not their family member. They can, well, empathize with that
yeah,
family. They can empathize with that person and feel that grief and that sadness. So, in one way, I can see a lot of people being quite upset with the notion of this woman saying that. But then I guess when you look at it on the other side, what she's saying is actually that family are in such a grief-stricken place and in such a dark place. They need to sit with that energy. They need to process that pain and that hurt, and that's what they're going through as a family unit. And so really the last thing that they need from an energy perspective is other people around them and other people that they don't even know adding to that grief energy. Because I guess when
yeah,
we look at everything from an energetic perspective, in a village, you might have all of these hundreds of people that you don't know that are feeling that grief, and what that's doing is feeding more grief to the grief, isn't it?
yeah,
So I
yeah,
guess when you look at it from that perspective, it's saying, yeah, the ones that have no other option right now than to sit in that grief, allow them that time,
yeah,
and everybody else around should really be donating energy of love and support
yeah,
and strength,
yeah, yeah,
I suppose.
definitely. Because she didn't just stop there, she really went to town on me. Oh my God. It's like I came out of that session. I mean, luckily this all happened before everybody else arrived in the for the group. But she went on. She said, "How many children are murdered every week just in this country? How many women are murdered every week in this country?" And I'm like, my mouth's opening, and she just carried on. She said, "You're only hearing about one child. Are you going
Mm,
to cry forever for all
mm,
the children and women and men? And then that's just this country. Let's go global, you know?" She said, "Where
yeah,
does it stop? This world has enough grief and misery without you adding to it for somebody who you don't even know." So,
yeah, and
yeah,
I guess as well that brings in another topic of discussion where this may sound a little harsh and controversial, but there's a certain element of self-victimhood in doing that as well.
yeah, yeah,
When there's a lot of schools of thought of one of the hardest lessons for a human to learn is to pull themselves out of victimhood.
yeah,
And victimhood is a part of life. We're all going to have times in our lives when it's necessary for us to play that role and process whatever's going on in that moment. But I guess the moments where we don't need to be sitting in that role,
yeah,
that must have been a bit of a wake up call for you in thinking, well, yeah, I'm kind of sitting in victimhood and self pity for
yeah,
something that's not even mine.
yeah, yeah. exactly. Exactly. Because then you take it all to all sorts of levels. Like, yeah, I was imagining how I would feel if it was one of you guys, and
Mm,
and it just becomes an endless, like you say, actually putting myself in that victimhood mode that didn't belong to me. So what you're
mm,
saying is absolutely right. And I mean, I still get upset and tearful when I hear something that really touches the heart, something, a
mm.
really horrible story of someone else's grief and suffering. But then those words from that teacher come flooding back. And I
Mm.
think, empath or not, you now go to a higher place. You now send out healing, you send out love to,
Yeah.
to where it's needed.
And also, is that really an opportunity from your perspective to practice gratitude?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
You know, 'Kay, I
yeah,
think that's one of the emotions that we really need to work on feeling more often. That, you know, having having that empathy for somebody else and that understanding of what another family is going through at the same time as having gratitude that it's not a challenge that you're dealing with in that
yeah,
moment,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. That's right. That's right. So yes, being. I want to say as well, that for people who are listening, that may think, well, yeah, this none of this applies to me because I'm not an empath. But do you have an empath in your family? If you have children, do you have one child? A bit like you were, for
Mm,
me, where one of your children is very emotional a lot of the time, often very sad, tearful, and you think, this seems out of context. Why are they like this? It may be that that child is an empath,
mm,
and you need to look at ways of helping them to cope with that, or in the early years to protect them from overload until they get
mm,
to an age where you can explain to them, that, yeah, you're one of those really beautiful souls that feels very deeply for other people to the point where it can make you feel really sad and upset for a very long time, and these are the ways that you can protect yourself from that without losing who you are. It might
yeah.
be that your partner's an empath, and you sometimes feel that their emotions are just overwhelming. You can't deal with it.
Hmm.
But, are they an empath and don't know that they are, or how to deal with it? So I think we all know empaths or close to an empath,
Hmm.
you know.
So you mentioned something there as about, understanding if you yourself or somebody that you know is an empath, and we kind of spoke a little bit about, naturally how empaths tend to build walls of protection. But what would your advice be for the healthier ways to protect yourself as an empath? Do you have
Yeah, I
any
think,
ideas?
I think, you have to recognise that it's not always other people's feelings that you're picking up. Quite often, you might be in a place where you're exhausted, you're tired, um, due to work commitments or other stresses, and so that's affected your mood and your emotions. And to recognise those times and be able to say, yeah, this is mine, this belongs to me, what can I do? And that might mean, say you get an invitation to a party that weekend, and you're thinking, well, I don't really want to go, but I feel I have to. Then I think in those moments, I would sit and think, now, why don't I want to go? Is it because I am exhausted emotionally myself? It's been a difficult week. What do I need to do for myself? And it may be that you need to slow things right down for a day or so. That may be the difference between being able to go to that party and enjoy it, or
Mm.
going without doing any preliminary healthcare for yourself
Mm.
and coming away thinking, I knew I shouldn't have come. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
that's just one example, I think, where you don't beat yourself up. You just say, yeah, I'm exhausted. There's a reason why I feel exhausted. I'm emotionally drained because of it. And these are the steps I'm going to take to
Yeah.
calm my
Yeah.
nervous system down, to calm my emotions down. And I think as well, as an empath, we all need to learn to say no. And there's different ways of saying it. I prefer the gentle way. For me, it works for me. If somebody says to me now, oh, would you like to go so and so? Would you like to go to the cinema next week? There's a great film on. Or, I've got a spare ticket to the theatre, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know how I'm going to feel on that day. So I will often say, do you know what? I think I've got something on that day. I'm really sorry, but let me check and get back to you. That gives me time to go home and reflect. What
Yeah.
emotional state am I in at the moment? Or what mental state am I in at the moment? Does this feel good for me? Do I feel excited? How did I feel when that person asked me if I wanted to
Yeah.
go to the theatre or the cinema, what have you?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things to give yourself that time to think because I know that there's a saying that I do really like and I'm sure I'll get it wrong. It's something like no can be a complete sentence or something like that.
I like
Basically
that.
saying you can say no without having justification of without having to have a reason to say no. You can just say no. And I would love to be one of those people. But as an empath, I think that's a very, very difficult thing to
Oh,
be.
yeah.
It's a very difficult thing to do. So I think having those rehearsed or practiced answers of, oh, yeah, that sounds really fun, but, like you say, I'm not sure if I've got something else on. Let me go check. And then it just gives you that time to step away and, like you say, check into how do I really feel about this. And if you're like me, you'll step away and you'll think, oh, yeah, I think that could be fun. Let's do it. Then it gets to the day, and I'm like, oh God, why did I say I was gonna I was gonna do that?
Well, that's where the self talk comes in, isn't it? Where you say,
Yeah.
yeah, I know what's going on. This is you. This is what you do. You're an empath, but you prepared yourself. You didn't say yes straight away. You checked
Yeah.
that you'd be okay about it. I tell you when it's really useful as well, when someone's asking something of you and there's absolutely no benefit for you. For example, someone might say, do you mind looking after the kids for an evening, or would your dog sit for me for a week? I want to go away, blah, blah, blah. And I really struggle with those situations, or I used to do, because I used to feel obligated to say, oh, yes, of course, no problem, because I felt the need. They had a need. I had to meet it, and that's another empath trait. And by actually being able to say again, you know what, I'm sure I've got something on that week. Um, or whatever, then it
Yeah.
gives me time to actually think psychologically, can I deal with looking after that dog,
Mm.
um, or even looking after that child for the
Yeah.
evening, and I still may not want to do it, but I may agree to do it because I've had time to mentally go through the pros and the cons of doing that.
Yeah.
So there's no gain for me. It's not like a night at the cinema or the theatre.
Mm.
But when I look at the pros and cons, I think, yeah, you know what? You can give that person that time.
Yeah. And feeling okay about that without without putting the label selfish
Yeah,
on
yeah,
yourself, because I think that's a big thing, isn't it? People think, oh well, I'm not doing anything else. I could do this, so it's just selfish if I say no. It's not. It's self-care, it's self-preservation, isn't it? And people
yeah,
have to
yeah,
start to learn to be okay with that.
yeah. And the chances are, if you can't do it, if you end up saying no, then, resilient people will look and find someone else,
Mm,
generally. And I was once told, that saying no when you're first asked if you can do something for somebody is actually more it is more has more worth than saying yes. And I said, oh, go on, how so? And they said, well, if you say no, I think I've got something on, um, so I'm really sorry. Then if you then go home and think, do you know what, I could do it, and then you go back and say, actually, I've looked at everything and yes, I can, then they're suddenly relieved and excited
mm,
that that no has now become a yes.
yeah.
And I thought, I never looked at it that way, but yeah, I could see that. Especially if they genuinely don't have anyone else that can step in and
Yeah.
help them out. So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking quite a bit about about pure empath, what empath energy is and how to recognize it, how to kind of protect yourself from that. Do you feel as though it's a good time to kind of introduce how that differs to psychic and mediumship energy, or do you feel as though that should be kind of a whole other podcast on its own? Because obviously we are going to talk in some depth along the lines about psychic and mediumship and the difference and how that fits in with everything else. Is there is there a way to kind of summarize the
Yeah.
differences and how empath fits into this world?
Yeah. I think that's a whole other podcast, I think, talking about the
Yeah.
different forms of mediumship. But I think as an empath moving into becoming a medium, the biggest question is, am I being an empath or am I being a medium at this moment?
Hmm.
And I think probably the two are happening at the same time, because quite often with an empath, you'll go in and feel an emotion with somebody. Not always, but quite often you'll feel an emotion, and that's the empath in you. But then because the skills have developed or are developing to take it to a psychic level, you can then say, okay, I've got this feeling and I feel very sad or I feel happy or whatever it is. Okay, what does that now relate to? So
Mm.
you're taking it beyond feeling into meaning. What does it mean?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
when, and you do it really, really well. In fact, I think sometimes you do it so much, I won't say better, but you do it really well when it's remote, because you can pick up a feeling and then put meaning to it
Mm.
without being in the same room as the person. And if that is not evidence of mediumship, and I would call that um, being clairsentient, because
Hmm.
you're feeling and being able to put meaning to it, then what is it if it's not
Yeah. Well,
mediumship?
as you say, I think this is going to be a whole podcast in itself, because I think once you get to the point where you're actually um, com combining the two, you have empath, you have mediumship, you can do, you can identify both of them individually, but then as you say, you can work with them it combined as well. But then that brings a whole new learning curve to understanding how you're working with the two energies combined. but I think it'd be useful as well to kind of give a bit of definition to how how you would know when how to determine the two independently. And an exercise we actually did with the group the other week, if you remember, was being able to do a short meditation to feel the difference between an empath energy and when you're picking something up maybe on a psychic level. And I think that's quite a useful description here, because basically what it was saying was when you're working as an empath, you tend to feel.
Yeah.
You'll tend to feel an emotion, or you'll feel something. Whether you can determine whether that's your own or somebody else's is a
Mm-hmm.
is a,
Mm.
a different matter. But as you know, the empath is feeling. Whereas if you're working on a psychic level, and you know, to some extent mediumship as well, although I think mediumship's a little bit more complex, because I think
Mm-hmm.
mediumship, for me anyway,
Yeah.
is the combination of information and feeling. I think when you're looking at things from a psychic level, it's more that you're getting snippets of information. So basically, this meditation was think about somebody and feel how your body feels when you think of that person.
Yeah.
Do you feel any emotions? Do you feel a heaviness? Do you feel a lightness, etc., etc.? Whereas if you're allowing thoughts to pop into your mind and you're now aware of those
Mm-hmm.
thoughts, that to me explains the difference between the two very well. If I'm
Yeah.
sat and I'm thinking about a friend, they make me feel a certain way, that's perhaps more empathic energy. Whereas if I'm sat there and I'm thinking, Thursday, the month of July, a brown dog, that's information that's popping in. So I would maybe then have more of an idea, oh, I'm picking some information up psychically there,
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
feeling emotion,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I totally agree. Um, yeah. And that's really how I see, well, I call it feeling versus meaning, I suppose, because I'm putting meaning then to that feeling. And sometimes you've just made me think, because only this week I've had a very strong empathic feeling about someone who's very close to me but is a long way away. And I've not been able to get in touch with that person. And I think because of the closeness I feel towards this person, I've not found it easy to go beyond my empathic feelings, and that's where you were able to step in for me and go on a psychic level, and help me to put meaning really to my emotions.
Mm.
So I'm just thinking how sometimes there can be a partnership
Mhm.
working there where I've allowed my empathic feelings to block anything else at this time,
Mm.
and you have been able to step in and use your psychic abilities to put
Mm.
meaning to what I'm feeling. So,
Yeah, like I guess you can be so close to somebody, can't you? It's almost like the feelings you're picking up from them would be
mm-hmm,
similar to having your own feelings
yeah,
that you don't quite know are about.
yeah,
You might feel depressed, or you might feel low, and you can't really analyze them in a logical way because it's so close to you. And I think when you have a close relationship with somebody else, it's a similar situation,
yeah,
and you sometimes need that outside perspective to apply, a more logical outlook
yeah,
to
exactly.
what's going on.
And I mean, really, you don't have to be an empath for this to occur, but it does remind me very much of when you lose somebody very, very close to you, and often struggle to make a connection with them when
Mm.
so many people around you, close friends who are mediums, can make those links on your behalf,
Mhm.
because you are just too close, you're just too raw. And
Mm.
so, in a similar way, really, that's what's happened for me this week, really. Too close. Even as a
Yeah.
medium, I've let my guard down. Not my guard down, I've let my empathic feelings um, become too much to the fore,
Mm.
and not being
Which,
able to temper it.
but then I think, that's just a good demonstration, really, isn't it? That no matter how long you've been a medium, no matter how many years of experience you have to be aware of your own boundaries and your own limitations
Mm-hmm,
in,
mm-hmm.
those limitations might be something as simple as this person's too close to me for me to be objective about it, or
Yeah,
for me to make sense of this information. So that's a learning point for all of us, including all of us newbies out there who are,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
just trying to aspire to your level.
Oh, no, no, don't reach too low. Go much higher than me. No, but it does make me think that, we're a collective as well. Like, had you not been able to do what you did for me this week, I would have been in this spiraling place of emotions, and I'm not now, because I've got some clarity about what the issues are, and I'll be able to better help my friend when I'm able to speak with her. But it is about working together and not in
Mm.
isolation, and just supporting one another as
That
as
is,
yeah,
yeah.
as a whole.
Well, yeah, and that's I think that's a greater lesson for life, full stop, really, isn't it? I think that's what we're all aiming for, to start to come together and work as a collective, undivided, you know, work work collectively as one unified consciousness,
Yeah,
which I guess is a good place to kind of wrap everything up today. Um,
yeah,
because as
yeah,
we've said, I think we've explored the empath. I think we now need to, for the next episode, to be looking at expanding that and start talking about some of the things we've introduced today with the
mhm,
psychic, the
mhm,
mediumship,
mhm.
and how
Yeah,
that all works together.
yeah, yeah. Because at the end of the day, each and every one of us is a medium. Leave you with that
Oh,
thought, listeners.
well, with that as our cliffhanger, I think I think we can wrap up then. Unless is there anything else about the empath that you wanted to get in, Mum, before we wrap up?
Just that I think, the younger generation, we're seeing a lot more em- empaths,
Mhm.
and a lot of them don't know what the hell is hitting them, you know? And
Yeah.
so I think we all have a responsibility, especially the empaths that have been through it, or, if you've got an empath in your family and you've been able to support them, support the
Mhm.
others out there. Many of them very young, that just don't know how to deal with it, how to
Yeah.
deal with their raw emotions.
Mm. Well, thank you very much for your thoughts today. It's always as often as we have conversations kind of outside of this podcast, I think we do. There's always still more to learn from each other, and I think every time we talk, we kind of pick up new things or lead one another to a new thought or a new path. So it's always a pleasure to have these conversations.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So as we close this episode, we invite you all to sit with what resonates with you. We don't expect that everyone's going to agree with everything we've said today, but there's hopefully, one or two nuggets in there at least that resonate with you. And whether you identify as an empath, a psychic, or a medium, like my mum says, we are all mediums, which we're gonna discover a little bit further next time. But what matters is how you experience your own inner world. There's no there's no rush or even a need to define yourself, really. I think that you just have to trust that in time, um, that clarity will unfold. So we thank you for being here with us and for sharing this space as always. We hope that you can join us next time. Um, so thank you for joining us.
And thank you from me.
Until next
Goodbye.
time. Bye.
Goodbye.